All right, let's start with Philip in Oklahoma.
Ooh, all right.
Philip is talking about a double standard that Christians have for, it looks like, gore in movies versus like sex education. I'm curious about this. Philip, welcome to the show.
Hello, I'm calling back. We had a discussion about allyship a while back, and I really enjoyed talking with you guys.
Oh, yeah, I totally remember you. You called in last month. That's awesome.
Yep.
Welcome back.
Yep.
Yeah. What's your question?
So it's more of a discussion than a question. It's something that's been bothering me for a long time. And in order for us to have a discussion, I kind of have some like prerequisites to the conversation and maybe some parameters to the discussion just to kind of set us all on the same footing, if that's okay for me to kind of set those out.
Sure, go for it.
Yeah, hit us.
Okay, so the prerequisites to this conversation are all participants in this conversation are above the age of consent or the age where they can obtain a device like a gun or something like that.
Okay.
All our participants, and this is not to exclude our LGBT community, but for this discussion are heterosexual. And they're either married to each other or single and not married to each other.
Okay.
And you'll understand why I'm putting that there in just a little bit. Because I'm going to pull in a little bit of Bible stuff, but it's just based on what I remember from when I was Christian.
Okay.
Next, loss of life. So someone losing one life is almost always non-consensual.
Mm-hmm.
Loss of life isn't consensual, right? But sexual intercourse is consensual for our discussion.
This
feels like what you have to click through to like get access to a new like social media thing, or like here are all of the stipulations that you have to agree to before you get access.
Honestly, it feels like this is the description of the universe that Marjorie Taylor Greene came from.
Yeah, right. Philip, let's speed this up. Where are we going with this?
Yeah,
we can always double back and revisit these.
Okay, and then the last, there's just 5 more. It's just the things from the Bible that I'm pulling in for our discussion.
Okay.
First one is there's the ultimate commandment, Jesus' commandment, love God, treat others like you want to be treated. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery. Adultery is extramarital intercourse, as definition. And then the final one is God's prime directive for humans is be fruitful and multiply.
Okay.
Okay, I am not Christian. I'm agnostic, but this is just for this discussion.
Okay.
So, for example,
that is some weird cherry picking, and I hope this is a fun game.
Go for it.
This might be a fun game. You guys are experienced at it. I think we will go interesting places with it. So, here's the thing, right? Like maybe a director for a movie, right? Some violent movie like John Wick, right? Is Christian, is like exceptional award, like hey. Thank God for me, my mom and everything. And you're having this, you put out this movie which Christians watch, like John Wick, where people are getting shot in the head, right? And they're losing life. And like that goes against the whole be fruitful and multiply. It's like thou shalt not kill, right? But yet it's pretty okay for Christians to be like, I saw that movie and it was awesome, right? While at the same time, right, just from an educational perspective, right? Like you could like Christians watching an adult movie and just learning more about themselves by watching 2 people having sex so that they can learn how to together be more fruitful and multiply. It's something like, oh no, that's too much. That's way taboo. And I don't get this double standard because like the adult entertainment side is like, hey, it feels like, and maybe you guys can correct me, but it feels like Christians should be pretty okay with that and not okay with the like, let's shoot things up. That's where it is.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that the first person who ever brought this to my attention was my grandmother. She is a very Christian woman, to the point where, she believes she has, fruits of the Spirit, the spirit of discernment. It gets interesting, those conversations. But she did have a good point when she saw us watching, I think it was like Pirates of the Caribbean back in like, I don't know when it came out, like back in the day. And she was like, why is it not okay to see boobs on TV, but it's fine to watch people murder each other with swords? And I was like, that is a good question. That is a good question. Christians are pointing this out. Now, granted, the solution for my family would not have been, okay, boobs are fine too. It would have been, okay, now you can't have that either, which I'm kind of glad didn't take off. But we do see that with things like kids only being allowed to watch certain movies, unreasonably restricted, and then being taken to see like Passion of the Christ, right? And that's just torture porn, really, but for Jesus. Yep. And walking away scarred because that's their first introduction to that concept. And for some reason it's fine because it's about Jesus, but it is just, you know, blood and guts. So yeah, it is a disparate kind of worldview, and we could go into why I think that is the case personally, but I am curious to hear Eric's perspective and also yours, Philip, because that would be a soapbox that I would not get off of for a while.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why don't you go first?
I just want to say, like, exactly what V said about the grandma. Like it's okay to watch murdering, but boobs on TV is not good. Like, that's exactly where I'm going. And all the prereqs that I put here are just there for framing the discussion. That's it.
Right.
Sure. So when I think about it, I think about how I go through, how I rationalize things to myself. And I think that being internally consistent with the way that I rationalize things around me helps. And it is difficult to be internally consistent about talking about sex. I think it's easier to be internally consistent talking about death, you know, especially when you have a faith system that is littered with justified violence. But when it comes to sex, you know, you have something that is deeply rooted in you know, self-shaming, and there's just so much tied into it that I feel like if you're raised in a faith that justifies violence a whole lot more than sex, it's easier to overlook it. But if you don't justify sex very much, then you just haven't gained the experience necessary to discern the difference between any of it. And so it all just becomes bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head on one piece of that specifically, which is the glorification of violence as a religion. And I'm not going to say that like all Christians are like this, right? Obviously. But there is a very warlike rhetoric that comes from especially white evangelical spaces, especially in the US, but, you know, this isn't just a one country problem, where, you know, if you listen to the lyrics of the songs that we sing in church, washed in the blood of the Lamb, I remember telling that lyric to a partner who had never been raised religiously and who had no real understanding of Christianity outside of like just the basics. And the look on his face when I was like, oh yes, as children we sang, "We are washed in the blood of the Lamb." And he was like, "That's gross." And I was like, yeah, I guess it is. I've never thought about it that way. But we are called to be, you know, warriors for Christ, right? We're building an army. We are, you know, the soldiers of the Lord. Like all of these things, angels are scary and have flaming swords. And, you know, in Revelation, Jesus basically goes on a rampage and squashes a bunch of people. Like it's really violent. And not every denomination or branch of that focuses on that element. But it is very helpful in a society that is centered around dominion and denomination and owning land and people and capital and expanding that ownership to be a very warlike and violent, you know, have that worldview, especially if it's justified. And that, I think, is a big piece of this as well. The reason that you can watch John Wick as a Christian and be fine with it is because it's justified, right? If you can justify the violence, then it's fine, right? It's fully intent versus impact conversation here.
Okay.
If you can be like, hey, well, yeah, it was violent, but it was necessary because X, then you're fine. And that violence becomes amoral at worst and even morally required at best. And that is how we also justify things like the military industrial complex and everything that we hold onto with violence today. It's justified. If we didn't do this, what would happen? And so, yeah, the idea that Christians are willing to watch John Wick because it has justifiable violence in it that is a means to an end they agree with makes perfect sense from that perspective. Now, I am going to cut myself off before we go into the sexual education and repression route, because that is an entirely different category of thing. But that to me is why that problem, that kind of dichotomy even exists.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. And I do kind of want to bookend it with, people in the chat are saying, oh, well, it's not just a Christian thing, it's an American thing. I think we are trying to recognize where that influence and where that dichotomy, especially those of us who were raised in Christian backgrounds, saw that kind of hypocrisy happening. And now that we're adults wanting to talk about it and kind of debrief a little bit about what the hell happened, it's a good conversation to have. And I think that's why it's important.
Yeah. And the problem that we have here, yes, there is a very specific issue with Americanism in general and violence, but the dichotomy that Philip is calling in about where sex is not okay, but violence is very specifically based in Christian ideology. If America happens to be sexually repressed in many ways, spoiler alert, it is, that is a direct result of the kind of people who founded this country being the radical, repressive people who got kicked out of other countries and came here. So
the Northern Colony.
There are elements there as well.
Yeah.
And to kind of just jump in there, right? Because just as an adult, right? Being able to look at it as an adult, and that's the whole reason why it is, right? Because like a few shows ago, you had the talk about the Passion of Christ and how it's gore porn. Right. And I was like, now I can talk about this here in this context as a discussion. And like, just looking at it, right? Like, and there are obviously lots of reasons for this, but like, maybe a man and a woman might be trying to have children, right? We're just going to assume that they're Christian and they're trying to be fruitful and multiply, right? But the woman doesn't know how to find pleasure from it. So making a baby is very frustrating because the act of it is painful. It's not enjoyable, right? Kind of thing. And that comes from some of that repressed. I'm just like, but like you could watch boobs on TV and a few other people get ideas and be like, oh, now I know how to enjoy it because I've been repressed all this time. But that's not okay. That's like, you've sinned, you've done all these things, but then like you can be like, yeah, we just totally watched the Saw 18 and like it was like more over the top than anything. It was pretty cool. I'd recommend you watch it. Like, how is that okay?
Well, I mean, every single Christian group is going to react to that differently. I don't think that my parents would have been okay with me watching the Saw movies at any point. Because I will be straight up, if we found out that an actor smoked cigarettes, we'd be like, oh, well, I liked him before, but now he's a sinner and is going to hell. So can't like that person anymore because they smoked. Whereas there were actors who didn't actually smoke, who didn't inhale. And we were like, oh, they're fine. Like, as long as they're not inhaling.
Are you serious?
I am dead serious. That is the level of policing that we did of our own willingness to engage with other people. If they just breathed it in and back out their nose, then they were just pretending to smoke and it was fine. It was only the ones who actually breathed it in that were the sinners. Yeah. Yes.
And I would go just to say, just that, with my background as well, like my mom was like, Sailor Moon is demonic, Pokemon is evil, and like all this, and you're just like, what? How is all of this against it? So I totally understand where they're coming from. Where
Sailor Moon
in certain houses, it's not going to be okay, kind of thing. But just in general, at our age, right? Kind of this discussion. So.
Sailor Moon. I didn't get Sailor Moon being demonic. I know that Sailor Moon made me feel funny. And it was probably bad. It was probably bad for that reason alone. I guess I didn't need to ask. But Philip, thank you for calling in.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
Take care.
You too.
My gosh. So I'm pretty sure that the thumbnail text for this one's just going to be murder, yes, boobs, no.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just realized that somewhere someone was going to clip Sailor Moon made me feel funny.
Yeah, that's going to be following you around now.
You know what? That's what happens when you have like thousands of hours on the internet, right? Stuff just, it comes up.
Honestly, the fact that we have not had more stuff like that come up is kind of disturbing to me.
Yeah, fair enough.